Oh boy, guess what? We are doing it again. This is going to be the same video as the last video, except faster. The last video, I painted a bunch of third-party versions of the same unit, and now I'm going to a GW sanctioned event where those can't be used, so we're doing literally the same thing again, but faster. Before you stands 6 Squighog's and 2 Knobs and Smashes Squigs and their 2 little Bomb Squig friends. They've all been pretty heavily kit bashed, like this bad boy right here. This is going to be the first part of my Chaos Knights box that's like technically painted. Just all the dead Chaos Knights that are hanging out as bits on these guys. This one's converted from a old Ogre Kingdom's Rhinox. It's got the Chaos Knight bird on top from the Desecrator. No, what's the other one called? The Abominant. This is some Ogre Kingdom stuff from like the Beast Claw Raiders box. We have the head of a Chaos Knight here. The Squighog's are pretty standard. This one's my favorite. He's got like a Chaos Knight faceplate on his head, and I want to try and make this video short, so that's all we're going to cover. Yeah, I'm going to try and see how far I can get in like 2 hours. We're using our friend the chess clock again, and we're going to start off with priming now. I just lay on like really thin layers of white, then build them up so that the areas that you would normally put like your edge highlights on, like the areas you want to be brightest, I'm just putting a second layer of white on top, and a single thin layer on the areas that I want less attention to be drawn to. So he's only got 1 layer on him so far. This is just me building up the second one. This paint could be a little thinner. I kind of like that it's not though, because you get this like splattery effect that looks like they're like actually putting war paint on themselves. So that's my first layer, second, just like that. Yeah, it's stuff like this that makes me realize how much I love my airbrush. I say as it clogs. We got ourselves some Warp Block Bronze applied to everybody. Should have done this before the weight, but that's how a lot of life is. That's just how it is sometimes. That's done. I'm gonna put some of this Vallejo Bronze in there. Same as the last video. Sorry if you've watched all 3 of these. They're like kind of the same. Along with Iron Warriors again on top. Dry brushing this one first, then this. I'm gonna let all 3 like blend together so you can see a bit of all of them, and it creates a gradient, and it's a really nice way of like just doing color variation throughout the metal without having to actually like pick out all the individual details. Like this area right here, his kill saw, like this part I'm gonna make bronze, and then I'm gonna do a little bit of silver all over, but especially on the blade tips, and then it'll like gradually fade between the 3, so it looks like we've picked out all the detail. The eye is lazy and doesn't really examine things with the amount of scrutiny sometimes we think it might, and if you create dry brushes between all 3, it'll look kind of the same in the end as if you were to just like edge highlight all of them at a glance, at least. Up close, obviously, if you're like a trained painter and looking for this stuff, you'll be able to tell, but at a glance it'll kind of feel the same. There's never any like actual footage of me painting in these. It's just like me talking and then cuts of models being more painted. So I'm gonna actually record part of this stuff. Just gonna take some of our Vallejo Bronze and then put it on like this bomb and this guy, and then leave most of the warp block underneath. There's like multiple layers of bronze now, and yeah, it helps create like gradation in a way that just looks like a lot more interesting than having one. I'll show you another example. Here, we'll do the thing I actually talked about, the kill saw. I'm just gonna put a little on top, and over here at the tips, there's like 2 different metal plates here. So I'm gonna make one the Vallejo Bronze, and then the other the warp block, and the sword tip, this thing, the other side of the kill saw, and underneath, and yeah, why not? I'll do the Chaos Knight face too. I don't know what I want to do for the colors on this yet. I might make it look like a Black Legion thing up there. Yeah, and you can see there's just like some gradation on there now, and it'll be even more prominent once I put the silver on top after. All right, so we got our Warp Block Bronze and our Vallejo Bronze on everywhere, and now we're going in with the Iron Warrior Silver, and this I'm being a lot more liberal with. I'm just applying it like everywhere, but lighter. I'm just gonna go on top. There's like barely any paint on this brush. There, we're just gonna cover it like that. Yeah, or I can see, you can't because I was out of focus. Now you can see. It's mostly just like overbrushed everywhere, but there is like a gradient near the tip. So it's like more silver here, and then it goes to bronze after. And then there's more Vallejo Bronze in the tip here than there is in the middle. So it's like silver, Warp Block Bronze, and then more like of the Vallejo Bronze over here. So take some of this really bright silver, and much like sponge painting, if you've done that before, just going like this. And it'll create some like natural scratch marks that gives it the texture of like burnished metal. And I don't want to add too much of this because it can be overpowering if you do it too much. And we also want to see our other darker metal underneath. And if you cover it too much, it defeats the purpose. Yeah, this is the final step if I were to like just speed paint these as fast as possible for the metal. I think I'm gonna put some more time into going over them and adding some rust and other stuff because the tournament's not tomorrow. We have a whole extra day to paint these before playing. I'm gonna take a smaller dry brush and dry brush some of this London gray onto the squigs. I want this quad to be white and I want this one to be like a really dark gray. Same with the fur of the Rhinox. I overbrushed some black mixed with our original base color. And then a second overbrush of German field gray, which is unfortunately a great color, over these dark Squighog. And I want their faces to be flesh colored. They might do their underbellies like a flesh color too. And we're gonna hit that with the airbrush. So we got our green done. And now it's time to apply some flesh. I'm taking Cadian flesh tone and I mixed it with a little bit of ochre and camo. And I'm just gonna put it like in the gums and the ears of these guys and maybe like the knuckles too. We got big old gums. I'll paint his tongue too. It's funny if he's got a big pink belly. And yeah, why not? Nipples. A tiny bit on the nipples. We've been out of time for like 10 minutes, but here's where they ended up. I really like how the flesh looks on top of the green. I added that same flesh tone to the Squighogs too. The next step is going to be adding some washes and highlights to the skin. I'm going to do some highlights painted in by hand at the far edges of the skin, and then probably like a dark brown just like in the last video in the recesses. I think there's something nice to them about like being this even tone though. Like I don't want to go too heavy because I like how the airbrush looks already. Hey, guess who stayed up all night painting? It was a long Thursday. And these guys they're not done. Nothing's ever done. I don't know if I've ever completed a model in my life, but they're like, I'm pretty happy with them. They're ready for varnish at least and to be played with tomorrow. Here's a knob on Smash a Squig. I like have done this in a lot of other videos, but the black like corpse paint is just, you can use any black acrylic. I've tried using like India inks and other stuff. I don't really like how they look. So this is just like Abaddon black, I think, or Abaddon. Saying Abaddon still feels weird. I thought it was Abaddon for years. Just that, like thin down with some water or medium. And then you drag the brush out starting from here and then going this way. For the most part, I use both directions, so mostly that way, so you have a thinner tip at the end. The white I tried to keep pretty similar to how it was when it was first airbrushed. I feel like spending a lot of time on like edge highlights for these brings you diminishing returns, and I really like how it looks when it's just like sprayed in that natural gradient out of that airbrush. These guys, I adhered to that even more. Like the highlights are a little bit of ochre and camo mixed with Cadian flesh and some like off-white on top, and it's just a single layer of highlights. And then I use Reichland flesh shade for all the recessed areas, and I just carefully trace that with a fine detail brush. The Squig flesh was the same thing, but I just used Cadian flesh without any ochre and camo and a little bit of off-white. The red in the eyes, I use contrast for that because it requires less precision. It's a good way to pick out those little areas. If you spill over the edges, it still looks nice, and it creates a darker effect, which I like. That's just what it looks like when you take the Cadian flesh tone and put contrast. I think it's bloodthirster red, whatever branded red they have for contrast right over it. And this guy, he doesn't even have edge highlights yet. He's the one I've spent the least amount of time on. That's like just what the airbrush flesh looks like. And I mean, as you can see, it's like already most of the way there. I got to pick out his teeth and finish the Rhinox still. If you haven't seen my other two videos, I go over like how I did all this in more details in those. This is basically the same. The corpse paint is different, but it's literally just like airbrush Vallejo white, then like some more Vallejo white applied by hand for edge highlights on top. The airbrush is doing most of the work here, which is what you want because it saves you time. Thanks for watching. There'll be more of these soon. I'm gonna make a video about Nova too, and there's still, as always, like 7 videos that I've made and haven't edited that may or may not ever see the light of day. So stay tuned for those, and thank you for coming by. See ya.